Miami has always been a team led by its superstars, but as Heat culture continues to define the group, is it possible that Erik Spoelstra is the true face of the franchise? We debate the pros and cons to give you the answer in today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members. The best way to support the show is to leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app and subscribe on YouTube. Leave us a comment. Who do you consider to be the face of the Heat's franchise? Let us know in the comment section. A reminder that now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get. That's a great deal. Now through September, all you gotta do is bet $5 and get 3 weeks. That's like the first 3 weeks of the NFL season. That's great. Are you excited for the NFL season?
No, not in the least.
I'm feeling less enthused about the Miami Dolphins' chances this season than I was going into last season, which doesn't mean anything because I've never been right about a Miami Dolphins season. Yeah, I think that's a good thing.
Right. I'm 16-0. Here we go, or 17-0, whatever. I got. Sorry, I'm still thinking. It's still 17 games, right? They just added one game.
16 weeks, 17 weeks, 16 games because you have the bye week.
Oh, it's still 16 games. Okay.
But the Dolphins in 1972 went 17-0 because it was like 14 games plus the playoffs. So in total, with the Super Bowl, it was 17-0. So there's a little bit of Dolphins history. Let's go down to Miami Heat history. We were asked a question recently. Can't remember exactly where it came from, who sent it in. So I'm sorry if I overlooked this. But we were asked if we consider Erik Spoelstra to be the face of the Miami Heat franchise. It's a great question. It's not something that I had honestly thought about, but it's really interesting. So I went through the years and the different face of the franchises in Heat history, right? So I started with every year starting after the expansion season. So 1989, expansion season 1988, starting with 1989. I think from 1989 to 1994, it was Glenn Rice. Then Pat Riley shows up in 1995, comes from the New York Knicks, all the hoopla coming around that with the facts that never went through, and Pat Riley being the celebrity that he is and was, the character that he was. He just shows up in Miami. It feels like immediately right away. It's Pat Riley is the biggest story, and I think Pat Riley becomes the face of the franchise right away because it was the coup, right? It was the guy that was going to turn the franchise around, and he was billed as such. So he trades for Alonzo Mourning and Tim Hardaway essentially right away within the first few months of taking the job. But I still think in that first year, it was Pat Riley's team. This is where I need your help a little bit, unless you disagree with anything I've said yet.
No, I think Ronnie Cycli probably had the title for a couple of those seasons that you accredit to Glenn, but other than that, I think you're pretty spot on.
Fair enough. 1996 to 1997. Is it Tim Hardaway at that point? He's fourth in MVP voting, first team All-NBA. He was a star in Golden State, comes over to Miami. I'm wondering if there was any point where Tim Hardaway kind of takes the face of the franchise title away from Pat Riley. I'm leaning towards no. But you would have a kind of a better finger on that pulse than I would.
I think it would actually be Alonzo Mourning, and I think that's the stronger case. As good as Hardaway's on-court was, and it's no knock on Tim Bug and everything that he was able to do, I think it was kind of viewed as maybe because Zoe's acquisition was first, and Zoe reached higher levels over the course of his career in Miami. It wasn't just like he became the superstar player that he was, a Hall of Fame level player that he was based in Miami. Whereas Tim had like this incredible career in Golden State, and then he was kind of bogged down by injuries. And so he was a player that was available for relatively cheap, which is how Riley was able to acquire him in the first place. So I think it was, while Riley was the master architect and the guy that you saw prominently on display, it was his team. Alonzo kind of defined it in the on-court, and Tim kind of felt more like of a complimentary face of the franchise, a second face, if you will. I don't know. It never really felt like Tim Hardaway was the true face of the franchise. It was Riley or Zoe, not really Tim.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. I have Alonzo Mourning becoming the face of the franchise in 1998 when he was really. I think that's when he sort of established himself as separate from Pat Riley. Really, I thought took the title there. Uh, Top 3 MVP finishes in back-to-back years, Defensive Player of the Year in back-to-back years. That's when it really sort of crystallized
His
the
peak, yeah,
Alonzo
his
Mourning
peak.
that we think of, right? It's his peak and those great playoff runs and those series against the Knicks and all these things. And by then, I think he was the face of the franchise. It was still Pat Riley, even after having acquired Alonzo Mourning for a couple of years there. And then I think Alonzo Mourning has it from 98 to 2000. The kidney disease knocks him out 2001, 2002. It kind of just goes back to Pat Riley by default at that point. And then in 2003, I've got Dwayne Wade. I know he was a rookie then, but it felt like something that year. It really did. It felt I would hear that. You still think it's Riley at that stage?
No, I would actually argue. Unfortunately, I would argue that it was either faceless or you could give the credit to Stan Van Gundy. Like,
okay, we can't say faceless. That's part of the challenge here. You always have to have a face. Okay,
then I would say it was Stan Van Gundy. Like,
wow.
because it was his team. Like, it was him rolling up the sleeves, uncomfortable, sweating on the sideline. That's the whole
Dorito
thing.
crumbs.
Like, yeah. It was like disheveled hair. Like, you had this. Aesthetically, the complete contrast from what Pat Riley was in his suits and polish and never losing his cool. I mean, losing his temper, sure, but never losing his cool. Whereas, not quite the image that Stan Van Gundy cut while he was on a sideline.
Dwayne Wade was selling tickets as a rookie. That felt like a big deal. However,
he wasn't
we're
that
talking
name.
about 1 year because by 2004,
you had LeBron James, you had Carmelo. Like he wasn't like the rookie that was like defining the class. I think he exceeded expectations. Again, he wasn't even starting.
He was the only one that got to the playoffs out of LeBron and Carmelo. I don't know. It felt like something was happening in Miami right away. Again, I was young and impressionable, so maybe
you were maybe it was, you were like maybe aligning yourself for the next 16 years because he would be there for a while. But yeah, so I guess I could see that point. But I think to a larger, older audience, I think it would still be either Riley kind of just operating for the shadows.
I think it would have to have been. It would have had to been either Riley or Wade. I will not accept Stan Van Gundy as an answer.
It was. He defined it. He was defining the team. Yeah.
We'll agree to disagree in 2003 because right away in 2004, and I don't think you're going to disagree with me here. Shaq gets traded. Shaquille O'Neal traded from the Lakers to the Heat. He's the face of the franchise right away, and I think he is that for basically a couple of seasons. Huge celebrity, comes over from winning championship to the Lakers. Whatever,
maybe 1.5, maybe 1.5 season.
I think you and I are on the same page here. By the 2006 finals, Dwayne Wade is the face of the franchise. It's much established. Before then, it probably has already happened, but by the 2006 finals, sort of like the Alonzo Mourning case in the late 90s, sort of just crystallized the whole experience, wins the championship, the greatest NBA finals ever played. If you guys need a refresher on that, last summer, you and I went back, or was it 2 summers ago? I don't remember. You and I went back and did a whole rewatch of the 2006 finals. You could check that out on our YouTube page and in the podcast app. But Dwayne Wade, it was
talked about it at the time, like the way Mike Breen was talking about him as a young up and coming star. Like we had no idea.
Michael Jordan.
Yeah, we had no idea that he would develop into a Hall of Fame career. But this is the growing buzz of him making his name and establishing himself. And certainly, I think it started by 2006 in the playoffs. I think he started to definitely get the whiff. It was Shaq was kind of limited. He was no longer the impact player that he was.
Yeah, by then Dwayne Wade was clearly had surpassed Shaq. Like not just for the Heat, but within NBA circles. Like they're like, yep, that guy's he's the best player on the team.
Yeah,
you could argue that from that moment on until 2016, for the next 10 years, Dwayne Wade is the face of the franchise. Well, inarguably, he's the face of the franchise. But I would say, wouldn't say
I'd say no.
Well, there's 4 years there.
From 2012 to 2014, it was LeBron.
So I was going to I had a hard time with this from 2010 when LeBron made that declaration that he's taking his talents to South Beach, to 2014 when he went back to Cleveland. Everything was so inseparable. I actually have from 2010 to 2014, the face of the franchise was the big three, because that experience and what that meant and the landmark decision it was just
typical
it was too big to separate all that stuff.
Typical West kind of finding a way to break the rules that you set by saying not one face. Yeah, well, you just said you can't have a faceless era at the same time.
Faceless.
You can have 3 faces apparently.
I'm just being honest. That's what it felt like. Could you separate from 2010 to 2014? You couldn't, like LeBron, Dwayne Wade, even Chris Bosh. They were just It was all one entity. It was one big three entity. It was LeBron's team, but that's a different question. It's no doubt that Dwayne Wade ceded the number one role on the team to LeBron James. He's talked about that publicly, but that's kind of different than being the face of the franchise. The face that people associate the franchise with. And I don't think that you could separate. If you really wanted to cut Chris Bosh out of it, I could hear that argument, but it really always sort of felt like it was.
Come on.
It was like the big three. It was the whole thing.
Nostalgia has tinted your perspective on this. Like Chris Bosh, you never forget how like Chris Bosh was. You know, you had Shaq, former Heat player that now talks up the Heat and Jimmy Butler all the time, calling them 2.5 men on TNT, like making fun of Chris's gender, like all kinds of ridiculous, stupid jokes that were just there. Like Bosh was never, unfortunately, and maybe he should have been. I don't think he was ever at the status where he got that kind of recognition as a face of the franchise. He was a pillar, a star, whatever, but certainly never the face of the franchise. But I think again, if you're looking at it,
like the big three or LeBron plus Dwayne Wade, but
I can't give Dwayne that credit. I cannot, because not only did he seed it. No, I cannot believe that in 2012 that it was. Like I'm telling you, like again, the public view is if you're looking at it from the extension of it's the big three that defines Miami, whatever that might be, then the big three was led by LeBron James and Dwayne taking that back seat. And not just on the court, but also kind of as far as the public image. Like he won 2 MVPs here, like not just the best player, but he was the way that people perceived it. Nobody was going into a playoff matchup going, how do we stop Dwayne? How do we stop Chris? How do we stop Ray Allen or Mike Miller or anybody else? It was LeBron. LeBron was the engine that defined his group. He was the face of the franchise.
I hate to say with you. I'm not. No, it's fine. I'm not gonna strongly disagree with you there. Like I think you and I are saying something similar enough where it was for sure it wasn't only Dwayne Wade. I think you and I are agreeing on that. If that's like sort of the common denominator of our argument, maybe it was fully LeBron James, 100% face of the franchise. Maybe it was closer to 50-50. Y'all could debate that in the comments. When did the Jimmy Butler era start? When did the Jimmy Butler end? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat. Like and subscribe.
Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your car alive, and eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less, including David Ramil. On today's episode, no one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we can agree to disagree on the Big Three era. You know what? They call it the Big Three era. They don't call it the LeBron James era. That might be.
You can't have three faces. You can't have three faces.
So LeBron leaves anyhow in 2014. It becomes Dwayne Wade, back face of the franchise from 2014 to 2016. Of course, Dwayne Wade signs with the Chicago Bulls in the summer of 2016. And then I think in that year, it kind of goes back to default to Pat Riley. And there, you could maybe start to make the argument for Erik Spoelstra around then, although I still don't think coming out of that Big Three era that we were not thinking about Spo then the way we think about Spo now.
No.
And so I by then, I think it just goes back to Riley by default. That's the year that they go 41-41. We're also starting to think about the Heat as the team that starts finding these hidden gems, the Tyler Johnsons, James Johnson, Dion Waiters, like all these kinds of guys. You start like the very kernels of what we consider the Heat culture, the way that we consider it now in terms of maximizing sort of these overlooked players. Yeah. And I think a lot of that is attributed in that moment to Pat Riley. So at that point, I think it goes back to Pat Riley. But then Dwayne Wade comes back. And so it's just back to Dwayne Wade from 2018 to 2019. It's Dwayne Wade, his last run. We all know it's just a blessing to have him back here. It's sort of the last dance with Dwayne Wade, the whole thing. So Dwayne Wade is back to being the face of the franchise. Then he retires in 2019. Then I think from 2019 to 2020, it's again back to Pat Riley. Jimmy Butler signs Pat Riley acquires Jimmy Butler in that sign and trade in the summer of 2019, but we didn't really know what Jimmy Butler was going to be at that point. We knew it was a great signing. Everybody was excited about it, but we didn't know what was about to happen, what the next 5 years would have in store. So I think even in that moment, we're attributing the success of the Jimmy Butler sign and trade to Pat Riley. Remember that was the team that had no outs, that had no ways of improving, was in the most dire circumstances in the entire NBA, and yet Pat Riley, Andy Ellisberg, and the front office that he has assembled kind of pulled a rabbit out of the hat. And then by the trade deadline, they make the Jay Crowder, Andre Iguodala trade, and they sort of fuel this run to the finals in the 2020 bubble. And I think in that moment, when Jimmy Butler is bent over the stanchion, he becomes the face of the franchise. But there's like a few months of a gap where I think it's Pat Riley. But then by 2020, I think it's Jimmy Butler. What do you think?
Yeah, I disagree with almost everything after 2016. I think you're right about Riley. Like mommy and daddy were fighting in terms of Riley and Wade. Wade's in Chicago now, so I think it kind of became still Riley by default. He's still here. You kind of have to pick a side, and Dwayne's in Chicago. So I think that's kind of maintains that for 3 seasons there. Like as good
even
as
when Dwayne Wade comes back
was, yeah. Like he was.
You think it's still Pat Riley being the face of the franchise?
It was. We can debate it, but I still think Dwayne comes back in that trade deadline, and it was already like his reputation had already taken a huge hit. Like
sure.
he was
coming off
he
the
was
bench
bad
in Cleveland. It wasn't
he wasn't great in Chicago. He had his moments, but he wasn't great in Chicago. And then Cleveland, that was a mess, and he was not very good there. It just didn't work out for him. And then he comes back, and it's like, oh, we're taking Dwayne back because it's Dwayne, but he's not really the face of the franchise. I would say it again. I would argue it was almost faceless, or I would give Riley the nod and being able to pull off this master coup. I would say Jimmy from day one of him being acquired became the face of the franchise. Like again, all of a sudden now you had a superstar here in 2019. It's like the passing of the torch for Dwayne. He retires, the last dance. They missed the playoffs, and somehow you're able to take and acquire Jimmy Butler. Like I would say, even the fact that he wasn't associated with Miami, but everything he did here, like he had Dion getting benched, Kendrick Nunn starting over him, James Johnson being on the outs. Like it was clear that they were not taking any BS almost from day one in a way that it felt different. Like that maybe the previous 3 years was kind of like, oh, well, we'll allow some of the things that we've been allowing, but it was very no nonsense covering this team in 2019. I mean, you weren't around. And so it was very different, like to see how it all kind of played out, not just publicly, but also internally as well. So I think it was a shift.
I mean, Jimmy Butler is the face of the franchise from like 2019, 2020 on to 2023. Jimmy Butler is the face of the franchise. Here's where I think it gets interesting. I think the summer of 2023, it starts to shift towards being Erik Spoelstra being the face of the franchise. Erik Spoelstra, for as great as a playoff run as that 2023 run was, Jimmy Butler's run was good. Like it was basically half that run. Erik Spoelstra had a better run than Jimmy Butler had in the 2023 playoffs. Like he was, in my mind, the most dominant force in the Eastern Conference part of the bracket, right? And Jokic was the most dominant force in the Western Conference of the bracket, and that's why you had those two meet in the NBA Finals. And then by the summer of 2023, the NBA GM survey comes out, and everybody basically just calls Erik Spoelstra the best coach in every facet of coaching. And he's sort of at that moment universally recognized as the best coach in the NBA. And
the finals run certainly cemented that,
right? And so I think, and this is where I'm having a hard time. Like I'm not like cemented on this opinion here, but I kind of think it starts to shift a little bit towards maybe Erik Spoelstra being the face of the franchise in that moment, because I do think last year Erik Spoelstra did kind of become the face of the franchise, considering that it was a down year for Jimmy Butler and all the things that we saw there, and he missed 22 games and wasn't particularly good in a lot of the games that he did play. And I think Erik Spoelstra became the face of the franchise last year. And I don't know if that's the case right now, but I think last season Erik Spoelstra was.
I could see the case. I could see the case, like even starting in 23, like at the start of the playoffs. Like I think you had Jimmy's ridiculously good, historic, silly, stupid, incredible games.
Right.
Like all those games that we saw against the Bucks. Yeah, and it's just like it was incredible, but at the same time, you start to see Spo coaching up an eighth seed or seventh seed, right? Technically, out of the play-in tournament all the way up and upsetting the Milwaukee Bucks, clearly breaking Mike Budenholzer, and like he was really getting his flowers. Like
it was a tour de force, man. Like he just Spo just every single series just so outcoached, and in a way that
greats too. I mean, like
Budenholzer,
Mike
Budenholzer was an awesome
Thibodeau.
coach. Tibbs a great coach. Like all these guys. In a way that I think even NBA media have a hard time discerning what is good coaching versus what is bad coaching. But it was so dominant when Erik Spoelstra was doing it. It was just like, oh, this guy's he's just coaching a different sport. It's just like a different league, and it just felt that way. So
it's such an interesting question because, like, also he was getting a lot of credit because he's and this is something Pat Riley has said publicly. Like Erik is the voice of the organization. Like Pat has his end of season press conference, but he's always in the shadows. You never see him. You see him in the practice court, but he's never the guy that goes out there. It's always everything goes through Spo publicly as the way it should. And so, as the legend, and this is my opinion now, I think the legend of Heat culture, as it continues to grow and expand and permeate to the point where it's like, oh, are you a guy almost out of the league? Are you an aging star? Come to Miami. There's a good chance that you're going to find a fountain of youth here. And as that kind of idea permeates throughout NBA circles and becomes just established now, I think it's like almost canon to think that the Heat and Heat culture are kind of symbiotic and feed each other and define each other. That face has to be Erik Spoelstra because he is the public face of it. He is the one that says, you know what? I will start Gabe Vincent and Max Strus. I will get them to play better than they've ever been. So I think that's the case for that. And at the same time, though, I have a hard time looking at a coach as the face of a franchise. And I know I said that about Pat Riley early, but I would almost say either you have no face at all, but it cannot be a coach.
I think it can be. I don't know if it's a good thing that the face of your franchise is a coach in today's NBA. We'll explore that a little bit more. And who's the face of the franchise now? Did the Jimmy Butler era come to an end? Is it Bam Adebayo? We'll talk about all of that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, but we've got something a little different for you now. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. 3 weeks. You talked about it. What a great deal that is for free. And then with a YouTube-based plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. And all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. That's a great deal. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. So my question to you, David, now, is it Erik Spoelstra? Is he now the still the face of the franchise? Or I think Jimmy Butler's run as the face of the franchise is over based on just the way that Pat Riley talked about him at the end of the season, the fact that we're not sure if this is his last season.
Yeah,
it does just sort of feel like he's flying under the radar. He wasn't even an All-Star last year, wasn't in the mix of All-NBA. The Heat just never had a chance to morph into playoff Jimmy, right? Which is sort of the thing that kept the spirit of Jimmy Butler alive over the last couple of years in Miami. So it's just like this weird nebulous point. Not to say that he can't get it back, because I think he could. But I just don't think he has the crown right now. And I do wonder if Bam Adebayo, coming off of that Olympic run, and he got the contract extension that keeps him under contract till 2029. And it feels like a lot of people, when they talk about the Miami Heat, also mention Bam Adebayo and what his growth might be and what his ceiling is. I don't know. I think Bam might have a case. He's the captain of the team. All these things.
Yeah, I think this summer, and Pat, again, kind of playing out the way it did in 2016. Like you almost have to choose a side. It's management versus labor. It's Pat versus Jimmy. It's money that kind of breaks that gap between those two. And I think you kind of almost have to. While I think I think mostly agree that Jimmy is still the team's best player and capable of being the team's great player. I think in terms of defining this team, I don't know that he's that guy anymore. In a way, he is, and not in a good way. Because if Jimmy's defining this team, it's they're going to coast to the regular season and then they can have this incredible run in the postseason because that's who Jimmy is. Jimmy's the ultimate closer. Jimmy's the ultimate gamer. All these different accolades that Jimmy has rightfully earned over the course of his stint with Miami and his overall NBA career. But like, that's not enough. Like, it's not enough. Like, we debated this on Locked On NBA a couple of weeks ago. Is Anthony Edwards the new face of the NBA? And it's kind of trending that way. I don't think he's there yet because you still got the older players in LeBron and Steph, and I think that's still it. And I don't think we debated this also. I don't think you can have a European player just yet as far as the face of the franchise, and as good as Nikola Jokic is, and as good as Giannis Antetokounmpo is, they're just, it doesn't feel like the face. It's still LeBron.
Yes.
Which is crazy because it's
it
entering his 21st season here.
Gray-haired face of the NBA. Yes, the gray-bearded face of the NBA, LeBron James. Yeah.
But when you look at Miami, I would say that they're faceless at this point. So I don't know. It's not Jimmy. So I don't think it's Spo. I definitely don't think it's Bam either. Bam, as close as it can get, because again, Bam is like the player personification of this idea of heat culture, in the sense that he's not an undrafted guy or anything like that, but the way that he does everything well, his defense first mentality, making plays for others, selflessness, availability. Like, it's not best player, but in terms of like the kind of soft face of the franchise, I would say that's probably Bam. But I would also argue that's probably nobody.
Well, that kind of gets me to my next question. And I think I agree that it's not Bam, but it could be. Like, the crown for a player is out there, right? Like, if Bam wants to be the next face of the franchise, I think that's possible for him to become, but he's not there yet, right? Like, it would very much pivot on this season. Like, if he takes some sort of dramatic leap, makes all NBA, another defensive player of the year case, all these, and then the Heat have a lot of success in part because Bam does take that leap, then I think he could become the face of the franchise. But I'm not ready to go there yet. I think it is Erik Spoelstra. But whether it's Erik Spoelstra or if the team's faceless because they don't have that player, to use your argument, if it's not a player, then it ain't nobody, is the fact that we're not certain that the Heat's face of the franchise is a player a problem, considering that it's a player-driven league, and that star players tend to be the most important factor in winning championships. As great as a coach as Spo is, he has been the best coach in the NBA for a couple of years now, and the Heat still don't have a ring to show for it. You need the player in today's NBA. So is it a problem if the Heat's face of the franchise isn't a star player?
No, not necessarily. I could see the argument as to why, but at the same time, I think these are just larger theoretical questions that don't really make a difference. Like, bottom line, whoever the face of the franchise was in 2023, had they won a title, or 2020 or whatever, whether it was Pat or Dwayne or Jimmy or Spo or whatever, or COVID-19, who knows? Had they won a title, like, that would have been, that would have been enough. Like, it doesn't matter who the face is. It doesn't matter if you're faceless or not, as long as you get the job done. So ultimately, that's still how the team is measured. I think I kind of like this amorphous blend of faces that the team is kind of defined by. It's not just a team; it's Heat culture, and that kind of is more of anything. That's a stronger brand than anything else, than any player, because players come and go, but Heat culture will always persevere. And it's been here since goddamn 1995. It's crazy to think that this has been in place for as long as it has. And that's what defines this group. It's the work ethic that Riley brought to shape and redefine this group, and that it's existed through Alonzo Moore, it's existed through Dwayne Wade, it's existed through Shaq, exists through Jimmy, and however long he's with this group, and it'll carry on after Bam and Erik Spoelstra are both retired. I think we haven't seen before or tried to define, because I'm sure there are other teams that are probably defined as, just sucking. Like who's the face of the Detroit Pistons, the
Right.
lottery
Nobody.
ping pong ball. Like, I mean, it's not Kate Cunningham, as good as he is. It's probably a ping pong ball.
Well,
It's like, it's close and not good enough.
Was there a moment where Greg Popovich was the face of the Spurs franchise or
Yes.
was it just,
Yes.
or was it always
Yes.
Tim Duncan? Or did
No.
Tim Duncan kind of just
No.
make sure that he wasn't?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
That's
Because it was
fair.
like, that's a bigger system, right? Like they
Right.
had David Robinson, but they also had Sean Elliott, and they always had all these other guys.
So you
Tim was
couldn't,
kind of just a young
couldn't
player
you
for.
argue then that Erik Spoelstra is the face of the Heat's franchise because it is sort of the greater system, and that I think we attribute Heat culture now what was once attributed to Pat Riley. I think I don't know that we give it all to Erik Spoelstra, but he has a big slice of that pie now.
Yeah, he's part of it. It's a collage, if you will. That's the face. The face is a collage.
You gave me crap about breaking the rules. Now we're just doing collages of the franchise. We're doing
No,
all
if you
kinds
look
of different
closely,
things.
if you look closely at the face, it's like, one of those paintings that's like made up of like small photos of like all these other different things to make it look
Right.
like
Right.
something, and you have to zoom out. I'm sure you've seen it on
I
social
think this
media.
is the next. This is the next.
It might be
Heat
Erik
culture. This is the
Spoelstra.
next Heat City Edition jersey. It's just gonna be a bunch of faces.
Okay, if I won't take credit for it, but yeah. Can you imagine? It's like Erik Spoelstra, but you zoom in closer, and it's like all the different players that have played there throughout the last
Right.
15 years or whatever. That'd be amazing.
Like, is that Norris Cole in there? Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So I do think that it's an issue if you're if the face of the franchise is a coach. I think you have a problem in today's NBA.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even mean, and that doesn't mean I'm not trying to take anything away from Spo, right? I think Spo would be the first person to tell you that I don't want to be the face of the franchise, right? That's
Sure.
I want the players, right? But I look at we just went through Heat history, and the greatest moments in Heat history was when they had just sort of a bona fide, no doubt, top 5 player, all NBA guy, face of the franchise, whether it was Dwayne Wade in 2006, LeBron James in the Big 3 era, or if it was even Jimmy Butler in those like 2022, 2023 seasons and all that kind of stuff. It was when a player was just so out of this world good, where he just captured the imagination of every Heat fan and was just cemented as the face of the franchise. I think in today's NBA, you have to have that, right? If you're winning a championship, like Jason Tatum is the face of the Boston Celtics franchise, right? Like Nikola Jokic is the face of the Nuggets franchise. LeBron James is the face of the Lakers franchise. Giannis was the face of the Bucks franchise. Like it's never a coach when the player is good enough to be the best player on a championship winning team. It's just never going to be the coach. And the fact that the Heat don't have that player might mean that they don't have the player that's good enough to be the best player on a championship winning team. Now, I'll say what I said before again. Jimmy Butler, he is no longer the face of the franchise in this moment while we're doing this podcast, but he can very easily become the face of the franchise again with a really good season. That's why this title is just kind of, the crown just sort of exists and it kind of goes from head to head and whatever. Jimmy Butler has lost it. He can get it back. But
yeah, I mean,
I
don't think that's necessarily
being that kind of player again.
I don't know that's a given either. Like, I mean, he's
of course not.
Like, you might have to. You might have to
old.
choose, but it's not a given that he's lost the crown either. I think again, publicly, this is probably still viewed to some degree as Jimmy's team, but it's also a team that's kind of amorphous and looking for something to define it, not just a couple of successful finals runs over the last couple of years. So I think it's a tightrope, in terms of you can't be really good a couple seasons and then really not good a couple other seasons and then just kind of hope that we're just coasting along until we maybe get lucky or things break right or even more right than they already have. I don't know. I think it's still Jimmy, like, for better or for worse, although I think that gap is widening more as in terms of public perception, because it's just, well, I mean, again, you're kind of being forced to choose between the team and Jimmy Butler. Like, we've had this argument and we've seen the responses from our fans and our listeners as people are kind of like, upset at either a take that we've given or our perspective or anything else like that. And in terms of, Jimmy's still a great player. And at the same time, it just doesn't feel like he's a part of what this Heat is trying to accomplish. It's almost like it feels like we're biding time, waiting for something else to happen.
Right. That's just sort of, that is the prevailing feeling now, because there was, I mean, his camp leaking stuff over this summer. If I don't get the max contract from Miami, I'll get it from somewhere else. And then obviously he went back on that, and he's back with the Miami Heat this season. But it feels like this season, if Jimmy Butler has an awesome season, is it going to be because he wants more money next summer, or is it because he wants the best thing for the Miami Heat franchise, right?
Right.
Maybe it's a little bit of both, but
you never had those doubts over the last 5 years, though. Like when Jimmy,
this is the first time, and that's why it feels like we're in this like weird nebulous area where it's like, who's in control here? And that's why I keep going back to Erik Spoelstra. You know, I've just sort of like, there was those weird years when we kind of went through the timeline where it was just Pat Riley by default, and I think it might just be Erik Spoelstra by default when it's not the player anymore. But that means that it's up for grabs for a player to get it, and I think that part is interesting.
I think
maybe it is Andy Ellsberg. I don't know.
It might be. It might be.
Let us know in the comment section who you think the face of the franchise is. Who do you think the face of the franchise should be next? Who do you want the face of the franchise to be? Let us know in the comment section. But for now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on your favorite podcast app.